I called the restaurant to confirm our anniversary reservation. The host said, "Yes, ma'am, table for two, 7 o'clock. I said, "Perfect, thank you." Then she said one more sentence. A sentence that ended my marriage before I even put my shoes on. She said, "And should we still bring out the second cake like he asked, or just the one?" I went quiet, because I hadn't ordered any cake. And I sure wasn't the one who made that reservation. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand who I was before that phone call. Because the woman who sat down in that kitchen was not the same woman who picked up the phone 20 minutes later. I was the kind of wife who packed his lunch on bad mornings, who remembered his coworkers' names, his mother's allergies, the exact way he liked his coffee, too much cream, barely any sugar. I wasn't naive. I want to be clear about that. I just trusted easily, the way you do when someone has given you 10 years of reasons to. That trust is what made the next few hours possible. Not because I was foolish, but because he had spent a decade teaching me he was safe to trust. And people like that, the ones who are good at being trusted, are usually the ones who get away with the most. Let me back up. 8 years married, 10 years together, my husband's name is Marcus. We met in college. He proposed at the same restaurant we were about to go to that night, which is why every single year on our anniversary we went back. Same table, same waiter when he was still working there, same tradition. This was supposed to be our 8th anniversary. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I'd already picked out a dress. I'd already written him a card. I had no idea that somebody else had already picked out a dress too. That morning, Marcus left for work like normal, kissed me on the forehead, said, "Can't wait for tonight," smiled in a way that, looking back, I now understand completely differently. I called the restaurant around noon just to double-check the time, ask about parking, the usual, and that's when the host said it. "Should we still bring out the second cake like he asked?" I said very slowly, "I'm sorry, second cake?" She said, "Yes, he requested 2 small cakes be brought to the table separately at 2 different points in the evening. One around 7:30, one closer to 9. Is that still the plan?" I sat down, because here's the thing, our reservation, the one Marcus and I always had, was at 7 o'clock. Not 7:30, not staggered, one reservation. One time, I asked her carefully, "Can you check the name on that booking?" She paused, then said, "It's under Marcus for 2, 7 o'clock. And then there's a second booking also under his name for 2 at 9:15. 2 reservations. Same name, same night. Different women, I would soon learn, different times. I want you to understand something about me. I am not a woman who panics. I am not a woman who screams or breaks things or calls 15 friends crying before I even know the facts." I sat in my kitchen completely still and I thought, because something didn't add up and I needed to understand exactly what I was looking at before I did anything. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called the restaurant back. Different question this time. I asked calmly, "Can I add a small request to my 7 o'clock reservation? I'd like a private booth if possible, anniversary surprise." She said, "Of course. I'll note that for the 7 p.m. under Marcus." So, the 7 p.m. reservation, that was mine, that was real, that was us. Which meant the 9:15 reservation, the second one, same name, second cake, was not for me. It was for someone else. Here's where most people, I think, would have confronted him immediately, called him at work, screamed into the phone, demanded answers right there in the office parking lot. I didn't do that. Because I realized something in that moment, sitting in my kitchen with my hands shaking slightly but my mind completely clear. If I confronted him now, he would have hours to build a story. Hours to call her. Hours to come up with an explanation smooth enough to almost make sense. I didn't want a story, I wanted the truth. The actual, undeniable truth. So I made a decision that even now surprises people when I tell them. I decided to go to dinner exactly as planned. 7 o'clock, the dress I'd already picked out, the card I'd already written. And then, after our dinner ended around 8:30, I was going to stay. The 7 o'clock dinner was, honestly, the strangest 2 hours of my life. Marcus was charming, attentive. He held my hand across the table. He gave a toast about 8 incredible years and how he couldn't imagine life without me. I smiled. I toasted back. I let him believe everything was completely normal because I needed him to relax. I needed him to think nothing had changed. At 8:25, I told him I had a headache and wanted to head to the restroom before we got the check. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, but I didn't go to the restroom. I found a server I'd quietly spoken to earlier, slipped her something extra, and asked if there was a seat near the bar where I could see the dining room without being seen. She sat me at the far end of the bar, behind a half wall facing the room. At 8:40, Marcus paid the check, kissed me on the cheek, said he'd pull the car around. I told him to take his time. I wanted one more glass of wine just for myself to savor the night. He left. I did not leave. I sat at that bar and I watched the door. Those 12 minutes, from the moment Marcus walked out to pull the car around, to the moment that woman walked through the door, were the longest 12 minutes of my entire life. I remember staring at the bartender's hands as he polished a glass just to have something to focus on besides the spiral in my own head. I remember thinking, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe the second reservation belongs to a coworker, a surprise party, a client dinner that just happens to be at the same restaurant on the same night. I wanted more than anything to be wrong. I ordered a second glass of wine I never touched just to justify sitting there. I checked my phone, I put it away, I checked it again, and then at 9:12 the door opened, mid-30s, confident. She gave her name to the host, and I watched the host walk her directly to our table. The same table Marcus and I had just left 12 minutes earlier. At 9:18 Marcus walked back in, not to find me, to find her. He sat down across from her at the exact table where less than half an hour earlier he had toasted to 8 incredible years with his actual wife. The first cake came out at 9:31. I watched him light a candle in it himself with a lighter, lean across the table and kiss her. I did not cry. I want to be honest with you about that because I expected myself to cry and I didn't. What I felt was something colder. Something clearer. I felt like I was finally watching the truth happen in real time instead of being told a version of it secondhand. I stayed for another 20 minutes. I watched them laugh. I watched him reach across and tuck a piece of hair behind her ear, the same gesture he used to do to me in our first year of dating that I used to think was the most romantic thing in the world. Then I did something I had planned in the quiet of my own mind on the drive over. I asked our server, the one who had seated me, to walk over to their table and deliver a small box. Inside that box was the anniversary card I had written that morning. The one where I'd written, in my own handwriting, 8 years with you has been the best decision of my life. I had crossed out 8 years with you and written above it in the same pen, 8 years wasted on you, and underneath I added one more line, enjoy the second cake, I already had the first 7. I watched from across the room as the server set the box on the table. I watched Marcus open it. I watched the exact second his face changed. He looked up, scanned the restaurant, and found me, sitting at the bar, wine glass in hand. Watching him, I didn't go over to the table, I didn't make a scene. I paid for my wine, stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked past their table on my way to the door. I looked at the woman, nodded at him, and said simply, he does that hair thing to everyone. Just so you know. Then I walked out, got in my own car, and drove home. Alone for the first time on an anniversary in 8 years. And it was, strangely, the calmest I had felt all day. Here's what I learned in the weeks after, once the dust settled and the truth finally came all the way out. Her name was Renee. They'd been seeing each other for 14 months. She worked 2 floors above him. And the cruelest detail of all, the one that took me the longest to swallow, was that the 8:30 headache excuse, the early exit, the second seating, none of it was improvised on his end. It was planned. He had booked both reservations 3 weeks in advance. He had built an entire evening, hour by hour, designed for me to be gone exactly when she arrived. The only variable he hadn't accounted for was a restaurant host who casually mentioned cake. People ask me sometimes if I regret staying that night. Watching it happen instead of confronting him the second I found out. I don't. Because here is what I understood, sitting at that bar, watching my husband light a candle for another woman at the table where he once proposed to me. If I had confronted him on the phone that afternoon, he would have denied it. He would have had hours to build a lie smooth enough that some small part of me, the part that loved him for 10 years, might have wanted to believe it. But I didn't give him that chance. I gave myself the truth instead. Clean, undeniable, witnessed with my own eyes. And once you've seen something like that with your own eyes, there is no story, no apology, no explanation in the world that can talk you back out of it. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. In those 11 months, I learned things about grief I never expected. Not grief for him, grief for the version of my life I thought I was living. I had to tell our families. I had to watch his mother cry on the phone, not for me, but for the family unraveling. I had to sit across from a lawyer and turn 10 years of shared life into a spreadsheet. Who keeps the house? Who keeps the dog? Who keeps the wedding china neither of us actually wanted? My sister asked me once, a few months in, if I hated him. I told her the truth. I didn't have room for hate. Hate would have meant still being tangled up in him, still letting him take up space in my head rent-free. What I felt instead was something quieter. A kind of grief that didn't need him to suffer in order to heal. It just needed time and distance and the truth, fully out in the open with nowhere left to hide. Marcus tried for a while to reach out, to explain, to tell me it meant nothing, which is somehow what they always say, as if that's supposed to make it better, rather than confirming that he was willing to destroy something real for something that meant nothing at all. I didn't respond, not out of anger anymore, out of peace. Because the version of me sitting at that bar, calmly watching the truth unfold instead of falling apart, that version of me had already given herself something far more valuable than revenge. She'd given herself certainty. And once you have that, you don't need anything else from the person who lied to you. I live alone now. I still go out to dinner on what would have been our anniversary, not out of sadness, but because I decided a few years ago that the date didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to me, a night I get to spend exactly how I want with people who would never plan a second reservation behind my back. Last year I went back to that same restaurant. The host recognized me, smiled. Said, "Table for one tonight?" I said, "Table for one, and yes, I'd love a slice of cake." If this story stayed with you, if you've ever had that quiet moment where one small detail didn't add up and your gut told you to look closer, trust that instinct. The truth has a way of slipping out in the smallest details. A comment from a stranger, a second reservation, a cake nobody ordered. You just have to be paying attention. Take care of yourselves. And next time something doesn't add up, don't ignore it.